Well, I've never taken time specifically to talk about what we have been intending by man being civilized and civilization. Kyroots, if you were listening a few minutes ago, really wrapped it up. So could I just repeat and ask you to keep in mind that very succinctly, I must say to Monsieur Kyroot, that man becoming civilized was, is, remains a genetic necessity, and it's not some sort of cultural alternative or possibility. It's not just something kind of stumbled into. It is as, in a sense, if you understand parentheses, it is as preordained from a 3D view as it would seem to be the movements of the solar system, the exercise of the laws of gravity, and etc. That is the civilization of man. It just appears to be of some, as always, ordinary consciousness and intelligence. It appears to be something truly approaching singular, that men look upon culture as being something that, even though it's happening on this planet, has almost no connection to the laws of physics or chemistry. That it is something that is so damn near unique to man as to be beyond any sort of analyzation, beyond any sort of cultural, artistic level. And it's not. All of this is always simply is a flowering its own progression from this idea of a split between man's mind and man's body. At least here in the Western world, we have our good friend, the great-great-grandfather of, or more so of many of us, Aristotle, and all of his drinking buddies. This great division between the mind and the body. There you can go back and find the seeds of many of the examples I keep using, and even us coming up with new terms. And that's at the basis of such ideas as thinking, well, then you have to, as opposed to thinking as much as you should. The idea of the primary world and the secondary world. It all goes back, not that anything was wrong, but I'm just trying to show you that this historical basis is still extant, even if here it sounds as though at times something comes out of the left field of the universe. No. I couldn't make up all this good stuff. You figure out which. The examples or the stuff that we try to apply the examples. In other words, do I make up when we were playing you show me yours and then I'll show you yours? Then when you show me yours, is that the real stuff? Is that the natural world? Or when I show you yours, is that the natural world? Or is that just the crap I made up? There. Okay, I wanted to pick up a few notes from last time, some things just as we were closing out. I hit some examples that just beg for a couple more words. Just as we were running out of tape, you recall we were still talking about the inseparable connection between, at least in the civilized world, that world that continues to move from genetic necessity. In that world, this inseparable connection between acts and facts, in particular regarding this kind of special hookup in this wordy, secondary way in which man details, factualizes the primary world. Remember we were talking about pornography, and I was using examples after I tried to get a cheap shot of getting your attention by using pornography instead of, if I could come up with some form of X-rated cookbooks. But remember, it can't be a cookbook, it had to be an actual eating book, and there is no such thing, you understand. But at any rate, several examples I hit just in closing out after I was trying to make one central point, but begs to be hit a few more times, is I even mentioned it when I was, those of you that can catch up to date right quick, this is all an intro, so let's be fast. Okay, well that was enough. Now on to, where was it? I was pointing out that how many men seem historically, continually, how so many people seem to be so disturbed by pornography, and what is it? That it is, no matter, just forget all ideas, we'll assume that you don't have to struggle with it anyway, but any ideas of it being some intrinsic, moral, religious, it is the secondary world factualizing the primary world. That's all pornography is. And then I was pointing out, besides the disturbing aspect that seems to be of that, then you can carry it over if we just stuck with the three great S's of the sex and the sustenance and the shelter of keeping man alive at the primary level, if that's all we had, if civilization had not occurred, if there was not a genetic necessity for some of us, or some of you, for some of you, some of humanity, to rise above the intellectual level of a mink or an accountant or a dentist or whoever. And I was pointing out that although it seems to be disturbing for the secondary world of man, in the civilized world, for them to detail, to factualize an actualized situation, that is, to take sex and to turn it into a book, turn it into a movie. It just, life not only has man do that, but then it has sizable numbers of people historically find it extremely, extremely disturbing. Of course, they say, well, God don't want us to or whatnot. And I was trying to point out to you that there is an unnoticed connection, not right or wrong, but there's an unnoticed connection that's going on between, in this civilizing process of, in a sense, facts trying to plagiarize acts. For the secondary world to try and factualize something that was primary. And then I was pointing out that if you took the other aspects, such as food and shelter, that there is really nothing comparable, that cookbooks don't count because that's a preparation that's leading up to. In other words, of pornography, I would suggest, if you didn't see that, if you had books that was just a warm-up, like, I don't know how they are nowadays, but used to, what tried to pass for pornography, they would, back when censorship was stronger in this part of the world, you know, you'd have a chapter, 2 or 3 pages that would try and pass for literature. The Supreme Court, well, the courts in our society, in the United States back in the 50s and 60s, it was like there had to be some redeeming artistic or social quality. And so it was like the first page that a guy would maybe lift something out of Shakespeare and say, well, this beautiful woman was sitting in class and she was reading, and they just left out, you know, a page of science from Shakespeare, you know, for a page or two, and you go, what? And then you get to the end and say, she looked up and some of the professor ran in and ripped her clothes off, and then you get into the stuff, see. But there would not be a book. There would not be a book that was all preface, just a lead up. See, that wouldn't be pornography. And if it was, if somebody did do a whole book like that, you would not have the people out marching in front of X-rated theaters, marching against a book that was all preparation, all erotic foreplay. In the same way, a cookbook is simply erotic foreplay in food. So don't go getting confused, but just notice there is no such thing as books or movies, entertainment of eating. You will not go pay to watch somebody eat. Now, you might go and pay. You might actually go somewhere, I'm sure they have these, to a cooking class. You will watch somebody and maybe be entertained or watch TV, free, a cooking show, but you will not go and pay, go to any effort to watch somebody eat. Nor you might watch somebody plan a house or an architect talk about how to make plans, and you might even stand and watch some people, especially in New York where the level of entertainment is much more sophisticated. You might stand around and watch people on your lunch hour out there building a building. But once the building is built, you will not go and pay or walk up to the building and stand there on your lunch hour and watch people live. That is, the people are inside. Now the building's built and the people are in there and they're sitting at their desk working or taking a nap, watching their... You see, the act themselves. But what I wanted you to see was I even pulled out an example that I didn't clarify, and it just begged for it, just when I backed up, that there was a certain civilized artiste that, as a matter of fact, and I mentioned him, and I'll let you figure out, those of you from northeastern Europe, that it was, I don't know, I guess the early 60s, he actually made a film, in spite of what I said. He set up a camera, a little 8mm, I guess, if I remember, and for 8 hours, just one position, filmed the guy asleep. And they actually showed it around places. And so I said it hadn't done, but I just wanted you to notice this. All it did to average people that heard about it, they wouldn't go see it, but just heard about it, it outrages them. Think about your mother, your father, just being a decent person. It was the same kind of outrage that I wanted you to see. It's not that dissimilar, although it seems to have a different flavor, but notice, you're able to hear it. It was not that dissimilar to people who are upset by pornography. He said the people in pornography, they think it's some kind of moral issue, but imagine people, enough of you laughed, you surely heard it, that if they heard, if somebody said, did you know my daughter is trying to get me to go see a movie at some little art theater down here. If we backed up and play like this, the mid-'60s, and said, she drove me down there last night, and the son of a bitch, the movie went on. They had to keep changing the film. It went on for 8 hours. You know what it was? And your mother or father said, no, what? They said it was a camera set up, and it was an 8-hour film. It was called Sleep. And they didn't give me any hint. I went down there, and you know what it was? It was 8 hours. It was a guy sleeping. And you'd say, what? No, what was the story? There was no story. It just showed him the guy's asleep for 8 hours. Imagine your mother or father, we'll assume that they were sane people, just average people. I want you to understand, would they find that interesting, entertaining? They would be damn near outraged, awfully close to people that holler down with pornography. They'd think, good God. There is also, since I was using pornography, I wanted you to see when I was saying that so many people were so disturbed. I was trying to get this going last time. Also, consider this. When it comes to pornography, and it's not that special, it just has an aura about it because sex is so important. But there's not that much difference in a way, once you begin to get an eye of it, of yourself, of why life has certain segments of its own body continuing to be disturbed in pornography, which, I repeat, is a form of the secondary world detailing and factualizing the primary world in the same way that making a movie of somebody asleep. But when I said that so many people, life makes so many men so disturbed, do notice this. It gets the headlines, but I would suggest to you that by and large, if you took the middle of the bell curve of humanity and disregarding anything about somebody tried to sell somebody, some ordinary person's young son or daughter pornography or something, just the middle of the bell curve with people throughout this planet, not the ones out marching, but if you ask them what they thought about pornography, by and large, they're indifferent to it. That's what I wanted you to see. I just didn't want any of you to get choked that pornography was that much different. I just did it as a cheap shot, as I said, to get your attention when we started. But it's the whole area. That's why I wanted you to see that there is an unnoticed connection. Pornography just gets all the press. The rest of it just seems to be silly, that I've pointed out. But people will not pay to go watch somebody eat, sleep, or live. And not many people, even those that would not say that there's any great morality about it, not many people will go and watch pornography. And if you took average people and you got them to do it, they can't watch it long because they watch it long and they won't participate. They think, well, the hell with this film, Where's my little black book? Who can I call? Enough's enough. You can't watch it much. Just ordinary people. I just wanted you to consider that by and large, what you've got is a kind of, at the middle of the bell curve, let's say indifference. That the connection that seems to make the news, such as pornography, overlooks and in a sense is covering up the other connection wherein life has a kind of suspicious, once you see it, hookup in this continuing progress of civilization of the secondary world of man, the mind, continuing to plagiarize acts. But life draws a certain line that you can't do it literally. That facts cannot literally catch up with acts. That is, people will not go pay to see pornography at the expense of actually getting some. People will not go and watch somebody sleep. I don't care if it got past the artist stage and they got Martin Scorsese to do the same film to set up with different shots, not just one cheap camera, but now in color. In stereo sound. I mean, if you want to hear the sheets, rattle, the guy snore and make, rude noises with his body all night. But a big production. It doesn't matter. The point is, nobody is going to go. They don't know why. Well, they'd say it's boring. And then some people with pornography would say, well, it's insulting. But most people would find the whole matter to be of grave, serious indifference. But notice, when you first hear about it, when you first notice civilization marching, it seems to be otherwise. Because the secondary world is continually in a symbolic relationship with the actual world, that is the primary world, and continues to plagiarize it. It's as though facts are attempting to become acts, which is what Kyroots pointed out is a damn good. It's the best one he's done in years, if you would like. I got nothing to do with it. I'm just giving you my impartial observation of art. Years ago, he gave you one that just about wrapped it up, for those of you that heard it, that art was anything that if you enjoyed it and it wasn't a part of the national park system, then it's art. There you are. That's all you got to do is look at it, whatever it is, and do I like it? And if the answer is yes, and then if you check, and is this in any way part of the Department of Interior or the National Park Service? If it's not, then it's art. There you are. This is just a bit more sophisticated, I believe, hint tonight, that art is man's facts attempting to be acts. That's all I've been talking about for the intro. So here we go. Oh, one other side note. Speaking about pornography, we ought to give everybody its due, everybody and everything. Think about such ideas as the pornography wars. They've been going on all the way from 42nd Street now to the baths of Pompeii. These pornography wars, historically and contemporaneously, still going on. To give everything its due, consider such things as this and all kinds of other unprofitable, shitty jobs. Who gets them? It's always been religion. I mean, who else would take on this kind of work? Who else could take it on except poor religion? This is old life says, well, let's see, I don't want people getting too involved, at least right now for whatever reason we're not going into, of turning sex too far from a primary to a secondary activity. In other words, we don't want pornography to get too popular. Let's see, how will I stop that? And it's as though it slips in to all the churches and the religions of the world and says, you guys go out there and attack it. And they don't know why, they just suddenly think, God's speaking to me. I've been moved to do this. Well, talk about a sorry job. Think about it. And there are people who pick on religion. There are people who go out and picket. Church people picketing these dirty bookstores saying, freedom of the press and the First, the 119th Amendment. Let them do whatever they want to. Give the people a break. And they don't even know why. These poor, the worst jobs in the world that life can't get anybody else to take, who gets them? Religion. Always. Just think about it. All right. Well, they deserve a little recognition. I think that was enough. Now on. So much for the introduction, the preface, the pickup notes. I was going to ask if you could, since this is one day of the week, grab a clear, a concise, a very plain, and a rough look that all these kinds of terms that we have been using, such as thinking more than you have to, are a kind of offshoot of that, of a revolutionist thinking and new intelligence, and thought that in some way could analyze itself. What is all of that saying? Could I wrap it up in another term? Yes, I could. You probably guessed that for me to do this intro. What is all of that from one view? Quite simply this. Simply, of course, you can go, ha! But it's quite simply this. It is unpolarized thought. That's what it always has been. That's what people have been talking about. That is what mystics, that is what the continuing progress of man's secondary factual world, pirating, plagiarizing, stripping, cannibalizing, acts. And then they get to be so much like acts, everybody forgets it. And then facts themselves have to cannibalize and plagiarize themselves. And it keeps on going. And they've been calling it all sorts of things, mystical visions, Satori and enlightenment, and me throwing in my own versions. But what is it? It is polarized, unpolarized thought is what it is, what it would be. It would be. It would be thought that would be, and thought being, of course, the physical neural activity of the brain. It is thought that is not based on comparison. It would be thought that is not self-centered. In particular, it is not dependent upon, nor is it crippled by anecdotal evidence. In fact, let me tell you what happened to me along. I still think somebody should start a religion just on that basis and see where you go. Or if you can't start a religion, start an off-retail store of some kind. That the whole basis is no anecdotal evidence shall be provided. And if people say, well, what in the hell does that mean? You say, that's funny you asked me because, well, all right, I was talking about this the other day and a guy came up to me. Yes, sir. There's a Kyroot in there somewhere about only God can offer any sort of proof and not rely on anecdotal evidence. And another guy said, well, hell, why not? He got nobody to anecdote to. Something like that, you understand? You got to be your own king. And you got to be a king in a place where you got no people. Because if you got some people, sure as hell you're going to say, let me tell you, a guy asked me the other day, or when I was coming over here, let me tell you what I thought. It would be, back to where we were, thought, not based on comparison, thought that is not, remember, self-centered in the way in which we've been using it. That is, that it is not self-referring, that it is impersonal. Impossible, but it would be impersonal. And it would not be dependent upon, crippled by, anecdotal evidence. It would be thought that would be closer to causes than to explanations. It would be like this. This kind of unpolarized thinking would be like, neurally, it'd be like being able to start all over. That's too good for religion. Don't even start one on that. But non-polarized thought, revolutionist thinking, thinking that could analyze itself, all of that. It would be physical activity of the brain that is beyond the present basis, the present proper, correct basis, physically, operating through polarized energy, comes out in an apparently more culturally put, socially, intellectually put way, comes out as a dichotomous form of intelligence. Has no choice. It is not cultural. It is not Aristotle's fault. He did not start. Well, it's a great split between man as two things. He's his mind and his body. There's facts. You could take it as being one of the original attempted plagiarizations, or one of the initial Western forms of art, of facts, trying to become acts. But he didn't invent it. Nobody's to blame, since there is no blame, but nobody invented this. It is the nature of polarized thought. If Aristotle hadn't done it, his brother-in-law would. Somebody would have had to. You got no choice. So this kind of thought would be like being able to start all over. Think about it. Being able to start all over from scratch. Since this is a day of the week, could I be a bit more pushy and tell you that's what it is? But think about it. Just think as best you can. Just dream, ponder, ruminate. Don't make rude or disgusting noises with your body after you ruminate. Cows have that position on this planet. We do not need you to join in. But just consider what it would be if you could start all over. But notice I said the first time, neurally speaking. But what if you told just an ordinary person, come join our group, come buy our books and our tapes, buy some of our fruitcakes. And by so doing, you will be able, believe it or not, but we guarantee you will be able to start all over. Think what that would do. How people, come on, I've heard that. But you said, no, this is serious. And even if they didn't want to join up and buy your old cheap fruitcake, or just those videos we have of our fruitcake sitting there. Just think what it does with ordinary intelligence for it to dream of being able to start all over. And of course, we're not talking about that you're going to be able to start all over. That you can go back and undo all the cheap stuff you did, and you can go back and unmarry the first 4 or 5 husbands and wives and children you've got strewn all around, and the 2 cars you've wrecked, or what. No. What if neurally you could literally just start all over? Just from scratch, it's just start all over. Well, if you don't like it, I'll repeat to you again. That's what this is. That is what unpolarized thinking would be. Is as close as I can describe it. It's like being able to just start fresh. Let's not go back and, well, plug up some of the holes in my education. Go back and straighten out some of the, perhaps several, 3 or 5, 4, 9 misconceptions I may have. To go back and perhaps through some kind of psychological effort, if not professional help, maybe strengthen my emotional resolve. It's none of that. There is no remedial effort. What would you like to hear? Possible. Okay. Available. Necessary. If there were, then I'll go ... and you fill it in, because I'm sure that's obvious. It is not remedial. Starting all over is not cleaning up your act. It is not getting new information. Listen, I've got the questions. I have studied philosophy enough. I've taken enough drugs. I've had enough extreme bouts of depression that I know the questions. What I want now is the answers. No. That's not what this is. This is being able to start all over. You mean maybe get some new answers to my questions? You're not bloody listening. It's being able to start all over. Period. From scratch. You don't take along any baggage. It's not that you don't remember that right over the horizon, or just right next door, there it all is. It's no consequence. But it's not that I'm going to drag this over here to some new area now that I have found the secret drug. Now that I have joined the mystical ranks with Huey Lewis. Another forward-thinking rock exiles. That I can now answer these deep questions. No. It's start all over again, I said. Just being able to start all over. To give, again, credit where credit is due. Just a way to slide into this. That's not the purpose, as you probably have already surmised, those of you who ever surmise. Polarized thought has played, continues to play, an extremely irreplaceable role in life, vis-a-vis what we were talking about in general, about now that everyone is good and civilized, and this kind of unnoticed connection and interplay, continuing interplay between man factualizing the actual world, the primary world. Polarized thought has played, continues to play a role that serves as, the way things are, obviously irreplaceable. It serves an irreplaceable role of providing guidelines as to how he should, in a civilized manner, behave. Now, if you had never thought about this, it's no great importance, but if you ask ordinary people, are you civilized? Are you a good citizen? Just an ordinary. And they say, well, yes, I think so, and et cetera. And you say, well, how do you lead your life? And all across this planet, and I don't care whether they go to temple or church very often or the mosque, but people would. If you say, well, how do you, on what do you base your life? They might say, well, I, try to be a good Albanian or Romanian or Russian. You say, yeah, but, what? Just how do you lead your life? If you're going to tell your children, lead a good life, be a good blank, Romanian or Arab, or what would you say? How would you direct them, or where would you send them? They always have to fall back on this. It's not wrong, but you have to fall back on what appears to be external directions. And historically, it has always been religion. Whether the people actually are active in a church or their religion, they will say, and this is polarized thought. This is normally, well, it's never been put in this way before, but it's the unnoticed guidelines provided for the ordinary civilization process of humanity, because on the basis of polarized thought, or on the basis of ordinary thinking, men simply do not know what to do, how to behave. Now, we can't stop and argue with that. I certainly can't prove it, because it doesn't happen. If you try to tell an ordinary person, if you didn't have some kind of external guidelines, you wouldn't know how to behave. You should know by now I'd fall into the sorriest, most useless tango with that person because they'd say, well, that's not true. I do know how to act. And they'd start naming things like, well, you should be kind to your neighbor. You should treat. And if I tried to say, wait a minute, that's from Judaism. That's from Christianity. They go say, well, it may be, but I believe that. I'm not a Jew or I'm not a Christian. I just believe that. And so you can't get anywhere. To try and tell somebody you and humanity would not know how to behave if someone apparently out there, some institution, if apparently from some external source he had not been told how to act, you wouldn't know how to act. And just an ordinary, intellectual, sophisticated, blah, blah, blah person would say that's not true. They might say, well, now there's no doubt that religion has played some part in the civilizing progress of humanity, but that's not all of it. It is all of it. There is nothing else. Ordinary people, and I can't prove it, we're going to have to go along, you just either see it or you don't. The nervous system would not be civilized. It would not have, once it reaches a level it can talk, and that there is a secondary world then of man, it would not know how to behave unless it apparently out here was told. And you cannot create guidelines and tell anybody anything, much less how to act, unless it is based on polarized thought. There has to be comparison. It comes out normally in the past, and even now, that these guidelines that apparently come from outside and strictly polarized is always on the basis, or it's generally been on the basis of God's wishes, the word of the gods that they want you to do. And stretched out a little bit, it would go from there to society's standards, which once you begin to see it and understand it, in a sense it's as vague, it is as non-conclusive as God, because there is no God without man, the same way you remember there is no Harvard without people, there is no church without the followers, there is no society. To say, well, I'm not religious, somebody might say. I live a more intellectual, I live what I think is more of a modern, contemporary life. I'm not, no offense to religions, but I live more on the basis of doing what's right. Well, how do you know what's right? Well, it's like I live in tune with my psychological environment. I live by society standards. Would you point out society to me? Remember, forget the sarcasm. It's just not noted. It can't be noted. In the same way you can't ask an ordinary person that's religious. They say, well, I live. I know how to live. You're not going to confuse me. I know how to live. I am satisfied the way I live because I live the way. Then they point to some holy book, scriptures, and they say, I live the way God told man to live. You say, well, would you point out God to me? Would you tell me where this came from? Of course you can't. They pointed a book, or they're pointing, well, somebody else said it. And you can have some ordinary people nowadays that would say, ha, 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 and get a cheap laugh and think that was a sarcastic attack. But they would say, well, I live in tune with the demands of modern society, or the needs. But normally they'd fall back, they'd use the term society somewhere. Same thing, you say, would you point out society? Where did these standards, the standards by which you live, that you're satisfied with, that even are more up to date than God's directives that your forefathers lived by? You live now by society's standards. Where is society? You can't go anywhere. There is nowhere to go. It's not a matter that God, as man calls it, exists or doesn't exist, or society is in error, or society is correct. It's this. I want you to see the background of all of this is physical. It is tangible. It is polarized energy. And polarized energy cannot transfer any information at the primary level. All you got to do is look at dogs and cats and rats. And it cannot transmit any energy at this level that is beyond polarized energy. And polarized energy will always speak via comparison. That a dog looks, well, I'll eat that or I won't eat that. He doesn't think it, but that's all he can do. Ultimately, I will either eat this and live, or I won't eat it and die. Or I will find food today, shelter, and live, or I will not. Here, you got no other choice. The ordinary intellect is not arranged to see that, which is why I went to some time a few nights back to point out that literally, physically, tangibly, literally, half of what everybody knows is composed of what they don't know. Half of what you think, what you believe, what you know to be true, what you know to be correct, half of it is untrue, incorrect, and improper. Literally, half of it. Or else you could not know what's true. Half of your brain is taken up by all the stuff that you don't believe in. Comparison. Comparison is just another factual attempted detailing, a plagiarizing by words of the reality of polarized energy. That is the basis of men saying that they live their life according to either God's standards or just standards of decency, morality, society's standards. It's inconclusive. You can't talk about it. You can't analyze it. If you try to, all it sounds like to be is an attack. If you do it a little bit further, it just sounds like sarcasm, cynicism, because it can't be attacked. There's nowhere to go. It's like you're sticking your finger in a little circle of mercury and you're trying to corner it. There's nowhere to go with it. It'll just run forever. You can stand there and go through this tango with somebody else or yourself. Now, where is God? Where is society? What is right? What is wrong? All you're doing is looking in mirrors. It's not psychological. It is polarized energy. All you can do is reflect upon it. Not analyze it, not see it. Can't improve it. You can't repair it. If you could think in a way that was not polarized, think about it. Be able to start all over. Start all over. Being able to know what to do without any instruction. I just thought I'd throw that in. Of course, you could also note that from the ordinary view, it is only being uncivilized that doesn't require any instruction. It is only being uncivilized that comes natural to man. Everything else has got to come from somewhere, apparently. And he looks, my parents, for good or ill, the gods, the fates, society. He got no other choice. He looked somewhere. Because if he was left from the ordinary view, this is a fact from the ordinary view, from the 3D world, left to his own devices, he would be uncivilized. We would all still be fighting over each other's women, each other's food, fighting over the warmest cave to get into, and you wouldn't give a good royal goddamn for anybody's feeling. The good of society, because there wouldn't be any, it would be every man for himself. Right? So, that would be the only thing, according to everybody from religious people to Darwinists to sociologists, psychologists, and just the middle of the bell curve ordinary people. They might want to clean up my terms, but we're running out of tape again. They would want to put it in more delicate, up-to-date terms, but that's what it is. They would say, yeah, you're right. Man had to be civilized, and they just cannot analyze it this way. It's the only way that he became civilized, apparently, was from getting instructions. And he obviously didn't instruct himself. No. And so polarized thought can only reflect upon, well, this came from somewhere. And then it's God, Harvard, the Baptist Church, your mother, your grandfather, those who jumped ship from the Beagle. It would be only, from that view, it would only be uncivilized aspects of humanity that would be natural, that would apparently require no instruction. And that is the position in which you're showing me yours, and in appreciation, I'm showing you yours. You might also care, you don't have to necessarily give any more credit, but take note of the fact that the paradigmatic origins, the initial templates of all the notions of God resides in what would be unpolarized thought. That's the best from one view, if you can get past, we'll assume you can, the ordinary mechanical magnetic attractions from prior civilized generations regarding gods and religions. When they do their best, as crude and as cul-de-sac as it is, and even they admit, if pushed, of all the descriptions of all religions of what God would be, omnipotent, omnipresent, all that. Think about it. You know what they're just saying? Unpolarized. That God would be a guy, that by God have a thought, and you said, hey, could you be wrong? God can't even consider being. How can he be wrong? He's God. What they're saying is unpolarized thought can't be turned around. He's omnipotent. Of course, then they get into, well, if he's omnipotent, how come he's having to fight out these great wars on top of us with Satan and evil spirits without being able to see, hey, wait a minute, this is the nature of polarized thought. But if he once overcomes the bad guys that gave him trouble, he will be omnipotent then. Of course, you can't say, well, how come he's not, if he's omnipotent, how come he ain't omnipotent now? But anyway, if you say, okay, once the paradigmatic origins of this, of a figure, a person, which all they're describing is intelligence. They're talking about the future, it leaking down from at least 5 dimensions into 3 dimensions, that God, from all religions, omnipresent, omnipotent, he's everywhere at once. That is, you can't say, well, Jesus, did God already leave? I drove all the way across town to see God, and they said, well, he just left. No, not God. Not the God, not our kind of God. Not according to all the good holy books on this planet. God is omnipresent. So if you're everywhere, you can't be missing. If you're everywhere, you can't be in the wrong place at the wrong time. If you're everywhere at once, you cannot be polarized. And if you're omnipotent, if you're powerful, you mean with no exceptions. Go look it up. You know what omnipotent means? It's not polarized power. You're not a king riding out, charging and thinking what a great day it is to kill my enemies, and you go riding up over the horizon and you look and you say, good God, you didn't tell me it was this guy I had to meet. That's not a king. That's not omnipotent. Omnipotent is having no polarized possibilities extant. There is no comparison that, well, I'm strong. That's like the good old Arkansas fable that every man's a hero until the opponent shows up. That is polarized omnipotence. That is polarized power. I can whip any man in the house until, a guy 7 feet 4 walks in the door. And you think, at least to yourself or your friends, you say, well, I said it before he got here. I didn't mean that son of a bitch. Where'd he come from? David and Goliath, if you'd like to go back and consider that story. But the whole idea is what is driving humanity's mind with all ideas of gods. It arises from a dream. It arises from the nervous system running toward what I'm talking about, or I couldn't be talking about it, unpolarized thought. That's what God comes out as. Or push it a little bit more if you'd like to consider all of the other historic ideas of heavens, paradises, utopias. God, Milton's not here, is he? All of these ideas, what do they represent? They represent lands, they say, afterlives, but kingdom somewhere. Would you care to describe it? All right, I will. Least Brother Moore or Milton were to show up. I'll go ahead and do it. All of the ideas of heaven, utopia, paradise, they are depicting lands wherein there are thoughts that have no counterparts, no comparisons, no opponents. I know they try and describe it, or they do in more simplistic terms about you never get sick, which is unpolarized thought. You're always rich, which is unpolarized thought, that you can't be poor. That you live forever, which is unpolarized thought, you can't die. There is no opposite to any of that. But the whole idea is all the way from gods to even people attempting to put together actual utopias, heavens on earth, the great paradise of the workers, whatever it's called. They are picturing a place where there is no competition, no comparison, no conflict of ideas. It's a place of unpolarized thought. It just comes out with the verbal appearance of it actually being physical and having to do with behavior, but it has to do with thought, first and foremost. Whereas you cannot conceive of death, whereas you cannot conceive of being poor, being ill, because that's all you can say. They just say, well, you would not be ill, you would not be sick, you would never die. It's a place of unpolarized thought, because if it was that, even if you do die, you wouldn't know it. Or you're not going to know it beforehand if you can't conceive of it. Or even if you are about to lose your shirt in the stock market in heaven, you won't know it. It would be... We got any time left? Well, just think, if you could start all over again, at least it would not be this. They could not take your thought processes, run them off over the horizon, turn those sons of bitches around, bring that train back and tell you it's brand new. At least they couldn't do that. Because if you start all over, they can't do that. You worry about that. So what could you say? What would it be if that were not true? If you were thinking in such a way that it could analyze itself, that you were thinking absolutely anew, that you had started all over neurally. Is there anything you could say right then? All right? No. Okay, yeah. How about this? If you were not doing that, if you were not just turning around the old thoughts, if you're not letting them do that to you, what would you be doing? Could I suggest this? What if unpolarized thinking moves you closer to not old acts? That's a whole other story. That's the whole polarized dream of going back to a better day, going back to the Garden of Eden, going back to a native past, which is physically, chemically impossible without self-destruction. But what if this kind of unpolarized thinking is to take you, to move a person closer somehow to a new, yet-to-be 3D world of acts? That is, acts that have yet to be. Not this kind of factual, non-polarized thinking moving you closer to present acts. You don't need that. They're inseparable to your present facts. But what if non-polarized thinking can take you to a place closer to, let's leave it as that, closer to a place of, quotation marks and all hyphenated, yet to be 3D acts? Huh?